Great. I think we are good to go. All right. Welcome committee members and members of the public joining us for this webinar. Thank you for making the time to be here. Again, I'm Cody Ziegler, the Director of Statewide Policy here at the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. A few reminders before we begin. This is a 2-hour meeting we anticipate, and while we will do our best to keep to this time frame, there is always a possibility that we may go over the timing slightly. Prior to this meeting, committee members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. And I'll try to leave time for committee members to ask, more general questions toward the end of the meeting. But if we run out of time, please feel free to, reach out to CalICH staff at any point with questions. So it looks like we still have some folks logging on here, but I think we've got a good group. And before we begin, I just feel like I want to acknowledge the recent and ongoing violence that has been happening against people experiencing homelessness across the country. There have been a few statements put out by organizations on this issue recently, so I'll defer to those thoughtful pieces to say this more eloquently than I could. But, it felt important to acknowledge that we at CalICH are committed to working toward a world in which our unhoused neighbors are treated with the, kindness and respect that we all deserve. And that we just really appreciate your all's ongoing partnership in this work to ensure that we are moving towards that vision at all times. So thank you for, being here and doing this work with us. And now I'm going to sort of awkwardly shift emotional gears here and say that I'm very excited to welcome our newly appointed CalICH Executive Officer, Megan Marshall, to our meeting for the first time. She is already just a crucial member of our team and is going to help guide us, the council and its various structures within CalICH, and we're just so excited to be working with her. So I want to give Megan a chance to introduce herself.
Thank you, Cody. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you all. Very excited for the future of CalICH, and in particular, I will say the future of the advisory committee, and really tapping into all of your, wealth of knowledge and expertise to better inform the work that we all do. So thank you, Cody.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Thanks for joining us. So I'm just going to briefly go over the agenda for our meeting. During today's meeting, we will vote on our consent calendar. We'll have a quick follow-up from the previous council meeting where some members of the committee presented your all's feedback around successful implementation and areas for refinement of the action plan. We will discuss the committee charter. And lastly, but sort of the bulk of our meeting, we will use to discuss the action plan update that we're currently in and what guidance we would like specifically from the committee to strengthen that work. So given those goals, we have a lot of ground to cover today. And I just, thank everyone in advance for your participation in the discussions that we have planned. Also, during today's meeting, there will be an opportunity for general public comment. We will allow for a maximum of 2 minutes for each comment as usual. We welcome all comments and feedback. However, due to the structure of the public meeting we're in, we may not be able to respond to them. For this reason, if you have any specific questions that you would like answered, we ask you to please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov, and we'll put that email in the chat. So with that said, let's get this meeting started. The advisory committee to the California Interagency Council on Homelessness is hereby called to order on this day, May 8th, 2023 at 1:08 p.m. So will CalICH staff member Giselle Sanchez please call roll?
Absolutely. This is the attendance roll for the committee. We need a majority of members or a quorum to officially meet and hold this meeting. Committee members, after I call your name, please say present or here. Apologies in advance for any names I mispronounce. All right. Ludmila Bade.
Present.
Al Ballesteros.
Present.
Samantha Batko.
Present.
Doug Bond.
Present.
Carolyn Coleman. Carolyn Coleman. Joe Coletti.
Present.
Charlene Dimas Peinado.
Present.
Vitka Eisen.
Present.
Dora Gallo.
Present.
Jennifer Hark Dietz,
Present.
Eric Harris,
Present.
Chuck Helget,
Present, although I'm showing up on my screen as Chris Martin for some reason.
oh, sorry. Feel free to rename yourself, or we could rename yourself for you.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you.
We don't need the thin rust anymore, automatically.
Janet Kelly,
Present.
Jody Ketcheside,
Present.
Margo Kushel,
Present.
Philip Mangano. Phil Mangano. I think you might be here. I think you might be on mute. All right. Chris Martin,
Present.
Mariah McGill. Mariah McGill. Luana Murphy. Luana Murphy. All right. Alyssa Orduña,
Present.
Sharon Rapport,
Present.
Janie Roundtree. Janie Roundtree. Okay, Emilio Salas. Emilio Salas. Miguel Santana,
Present.
thank you. Doug Shoemaker. Doug Shoemaker,
Present.
thank you. Sean Spear,
Present.
Reba Stevens,
Present.
Megan Van Sant,
Present.
Alex Vitsotsky,
Present.
Javon Wilkes,
Present.
Roxanne Wilson. Roxanne Wilson. All right. We have a quorum. We have 24 members present. We could continue this with this meeting. I will lead us on to the next section. This is agenda item 2, the consent calendar. The consent calendar is for regular non-controversial items that need to be approved by committee via vote, where we do not expect discussion from members. That said, the committee may engage in discussion if any of the items on the consent calendar, if they so choose. We have one item, the adoption of the February 6th committee meeting summary. Are there any questions from committee members or any comments? All right, before proceeding, since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open it up to public comment. Please keep comments to items on the consent calendar only. If your comment is not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for general public comment at the end of this meeting. If you're connected through Zoom, select the raised hand icon in the meeting window of your computer and we'll unmute you. For those joining us by phone, you may press *9 to indicate that you'd like to comment. All right, I'm going to take a second to see if any hands are raised. All right, it looks like there's no comments. Would anybody like to motion to approve the meeting summary?
So moved. Seconded.
Thank you. We got a motion to move in a second. As I call your name, please say yes or aye. You may also abstain or vote no. I'm going to call the roll again so we could approve the meeting summary. Ludmilla Bade,
Abstain.
Alba Esteros,
Aye.
Samantha Batko,
Aye.
Doug Bond,
Aye.
Carolyn Coleman, if you're present.
Present.
Thank you.
Aye.
Joe Coletti,
Yes.
Charlene Dimas Peinado,
Aye.
Vitka Eidson,
Yes.
Dora Gallo,
Aye.
Jennifer Hart Dietz,
Aye.
Eric Harris,
Aye.
Chuck Helget,
Aye.
Janet Kelly,
Aye.
Jody Ketcheside,
Aye.
Margaret Cushell,
Aye.
Philip Mangano, if you're present. Okay, Chris Martin,
Aye.
Mariah McGill, if you're here. Luana Murphy, if you're present. Elisa Orduña,
Aye.
Sharon Rapport,
Aye.
Janie Roundtree, if you're present. Emilio Salas, if you're present. Miguel Santana,
Aye.
thank you. Doug Shoemaker,
Aye.
Sean Spear,
Aye.
Reba Stevens,
Aye.
Megan Van Sant,
Aye.
Alex Vitsotsky,
Aye.
Javon Wilkes,
Aye.
and Roxanne Wilson, if you're present. All right, the motion has passed. We have 24 votes for and 1 abstention. All right, I will now turn it to Cody Ziegert to facilitate the next item.
Great, thanks, Giselle. And thank you all for your patience as we go through the requisite official parts of our meeting at the beginning. I'm excited for the day when I can, with my eyes closed, list all of your names in alphabetical order. So yeah, really excited to be here and talk about our next item. So this is just a follow-up from our February 27th council meeting. As you may know, some of our committee members volunteered to speak to our council members during their last meeting on February 27th. In general, after any committee feedback is presented to the council, we plan to follow up with you all at the subsequent committee meeting to summarize any feedback from council members that we heard for those who weren't able to attend. In the future, we'll plan to have the committee members themselves report back. But since we didn't set that expectation in advance, I'll just share some brief takeaways this time around. So as a reminder, at your last meeting, we asked you to provide feedback on examples of successful implementation activities within the action plan and areas for potential improvement or expansion of that work. The summary of your feedback was shared with council members. It can be found on our council materials webpage. Our very own Roxanne Wilson took a few minutes to share out some of that feedback with our council members, and other members of the committee were also present to answer questions. So thanks to all of those who were able to attend that meeting. So on the next slide, we've summarized just some of the high-level takeaways from council member comments or responses to the feedback. In general, they really appreciated the feedback and sort of their conversation centered around areas of sort of future inquiry for the advisory committee to help with based on the perspectives you all bring to this work. So this includes identifying areas for increased state collaboration, identifying appropriate metrics to measure the success of our collective work, opportunities to effectively support local implementation of state programs such as CalAIM rollout in local jurisdictions. I think that was called out specifically. And bringing out lessons learned about resources and coordination from the COVID-19 pandemic programs. And as we will discuss later in this agenda, these align very closely to the areas that you all identified as wanting to explore more deeply as a committee. So therefore, the bulk of this meeting will really be dedicated to kicking off some of those conversations and getting you all started on some projects related to these questions. Before we move on, however, I just want to invite any of the committee members who were able to attend that council meeting to jump in if they have anything to add to this list based on what they heard or remember. So if there's any additional comments, feel free just to raise your hand and I will call on you. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, Cody, just to elaborate a little bit on the first bullet and everything, one of the things that we did talk about was that there's an increasing amount of legislation that is being approved and that's being proposed, in which the Cal ICH, the council, all of a sudden are supposed to come up with goals and measures and actions. And I was even reading in AB 799 that there's a plan to solve homelessness by 2035 and stuff like that. And that stuff kind of pops up, and again, it's the legislation hasn't always passed, but again, for us to be able to weigh in, on those kind of things that the council is being called to do. And so I guess I just wanted to delineate a little bit, a couple of these points. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Any other comments from anyone who was able to attend that meeting? And yeah, we'll definitely get into some conversations about how do we, identify areas for increased state collaboration and identifying the appropriate metrics to understand our progress on that work. So that's sort of where we're focusing the latter half of this meeting. Great. So I will, yeah, as I said, we'll come back to these and how we move these discussions forward later in this agenda. But for now, we'll move to the next agenda item. Great, perfect. So for this item, I would like to reintroduce Orit Kallman, who I think a lot of you have met now. And she's going to talk about the conversations that many of you had regarding the goals of this committee and the advisory committee charter that was developed based on that. So Orit, I think you're here. Yeah, there you are.
I'm here, yes. Thank you, Cody. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And what I'm going to do today is go through a short version of what the charter looks like, which was shared with you, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. And I'm going to kind of go through key pieces where we want to just come back to you and just check in and say, did we get this right? Is there anything that needs to be clarified or something that is missing? Because our goal today is really to get any last feedback from you so we can finalize the charter with staff, and then staff will send it to you for confirmation that yes, you are agreeing to abide by the charter while serving on the advisory committee. So that's the plan. And before I walk through it, I just want to say I'm just so thankful for the time that you all provided to meet with me, with staff, and share your insights, share your ideas. This is a part of my work that I particularly enjoy, because especially now that we are in a virtual format, these small conversations that we had really allow us to connect in a way that sometimes in large virtual meetings we don't get to. And I heard several of you express that that they really appreciated being with just a few members and having a conversation, learning from each other. And I know as we move forward with the work of the advisory committee, there will be opportunities for you to get into that format of small group. Many of you expressed a desire to go beyond the 2-hour quarterly meeting, acknowledging that that's not enough time to do a lot of, deep dive into topic, but there might be opportunities to identify topics that you have particular expertise, and therefore form these groups where you can kind of do deeper work on particular topics that have been identified by council and by the committee. So I'm gonna go through the various components, starting with on next slide. Thank you. Talking a little bit about the process that we've gone through. So thinking about the charter, of course, wanted to anchor that in the council's guiding principles and practices. And so we started by asking you to share how your work and how the work of the advisory committee can support those principles, pursuing racial equity and justice, considering the full diversity of people, seeking and valuing expertise of people with lived experience, strengthening housing first approaches, balancing crisis response and permanent solutions, trauma-informed care, person-centered services, aligning health, housing, and homelessness strategies, thinking about that coordination. So these are things that have been put forth by the council, and you all had an opportunity to share and provide examples from your work and how you support that. And when we kind of looked back at all our conversations, as a whole, you addressed all of these different principles, which means that we have the right mix of people on this committee. And importantly, you all emphasize that these principles are interconnected and should be considered as such in the work that we're doing to support individuals experience homelessness. So in terms of the committee's purpose, while you're asked by a legislature to provide guidance to the council, in our conversations, you're expanded on what that means to include the areas that we have here under purpose and goals. So the importance of advocacy for the pursuance of racial equity and justice, elevating diverse lived experience perspective to directly inform state policy, both discussions and decision-making, the importance of sharing local perspectives and experience to inform those state decisions and support opportunities for alignment and connection among state and local systems. You identify a desire for the committee to be an opportunity for learning, recognizing that you all bring a lot of expertise and experience and knowledge that is really important to learn from. So leveraging that knowledge and expand our collective understanding on the issues facing the state and local communities, identifying and advance approaches that are creative, responsive, coordinated. We also learned that it's important as we're thinking about these different approaches to celebrate success and acknowledge what works and build on that, and the importance of having a shared language when we're thinking about homelessness and all the issues that we're addressing. So these were things that as we move forward in developing agendas, we want to make sure that we're keep coming back to meeting these goals and purpose that you are setting up for the committee. And in relationship to the council, we heard from many of you about the importance of this being a two-way relationship. So you wanted to make sure that you share about your work and also hear about what the state is doing and informing the state's roadmap. So really wanting to make sure that there is an opportunity to hear from the council and inform the council. We asked you about the topic around reporting to the council, and what we heard from many of you, which is represented in the charter, is the desire to make sure that all members of the committee have an opportunity to report to the council and engage with the council, that this is an important relationship for members to nurture, and that you all represent different perspectives and voices, and it's important for the council to hear from different members. So this is these are kind of just an outline, but in the charter, it's outlined a little bit in more detail, and want to make sure that you have a chance to review that. And before I open it up to hear from you, on the next slide, you'll see what we heard also is that important for the committee, not just to identify what it is that you're going to do, but also how the work is done. So the spirit of by which you want to work together. So many of you suggested principles to guide the work of the committee. And here on the slide, we have some of the key principles, and in the charter under each of these principles, we have also included some of the suggestions that you provided in terms of what that looks like in practice. So for example, the principle around honesty, transparency, and being present. You've suggested that when sharing an opinion, participants acknowledge the perspective they represent, so we can make a connection between what you're saying and what informs that opinion. Wanting to make sure that to the extent possible, you are committed to joining all committee meetings, and you support the committee by actively participating in discussion. So you'll see in the charter a bit of an explanation as what we mean by supporting safe space, upholding respectful dialogue, intentionally empowering and incorporating lived experience perspective, and anchor the conversation with a shared purpose of providing guidance to the council. And that relates to the fact that as we talked about in our conversation, there's so many issues that need to be addressed, and limited time. We want to make sure that the committee is focused on its agenda moving forward. And of course, wanting to think innovatively, welcoming new ideas, but also learning from what has been successful. So I'm going to pause for a moment and would love to hear from you, given those kind of three areas around what is your purpose, how you connect with the council, and how you go about your work together. If there's anything else that needs to be explicitly identified, or if you want to clarify or add to this, we'd love to hear from you. Also, a thumbs up would be good, just to say. Yeah, would love to hear from you. And I don't know if Cody or Giselle, if one of you want to help me kind of think through calling on people who may have thoughts on this.
Yeah, Lisa.
Well, I just want to say, Orvi, thank you so much. Just the conversations that we've had as a large group, and I know in the smaller group that I participated in, you captured it really well, the essence, the intention, the range of ideas and expression. I think you just captured them in such a beautiful way where I'm like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. It's very clear, and just want to show appreciation.
Thanks, Alyssa. I think Sharon, you have a hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I agree completely with Lisa, and I also, I think in some of the conversations we had talked about having more conversation about how the departments and agencies could work more together or could collaborate to achieve specific goals. And I saw that kind of alluded to in the previous slide, but not stated real clearly. And so just wanted to add that if we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that would be a key topic of your conversation today. So some of the topics that you've identified that you really want to do that deeper dive into will become part of agenda items. But we'll go back and make sure that that piece of really advancing that collaboration is there, not just between state and local. I think that's what you're referring to. We talk about state and local, but among agencies and departments. Right. Anybody else wants to weigh in? Ludmilla, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to second those who are thanking you for the excellent, collaborative work that you're doing to really have people heard and to help, kind of center this whole process. I'm extremely grateful for that and extremely excited about it. I think for me as a lived experience representative, the key elements that are going to be helpful for me going forward are clarity on the path or paths that that I can that everybody actually can give feedback on. Like, for example, if I have a great, wonderful idea, do I send that to staff to distribute to others, or do I or can I individually reach out? What is the appropriate kind of path to share information? So any clarity on that? I think I suspect I'm not the only person that would like to offer things from time to time, and is unclear on how broadly that needs to be shared or how narrowly it should be. Okay, and then the charter. This is a big thing. We have incredible people part of this committee and the council, and we are working together collaboratively on huge issues. And so many aspects of our society are not supporting, that kind of collaborative, growing, discovering kind of conversation that we need to have in order to succeed. So I want to say, as far as the process, the big thing that I want to say is that I would like there to be built in like intervals when we can kind of adjust and expand the process of being effective, collaborators.
I think I lost Ludmilla. Did we lose her? I think so.
Yeah, I can't, Ludmilla, if you're talking, I can't hear you anymore. But just to respond to your first point, I mean, both points are great, and just to respond to your first point as
My
well.
apologies.
Oh, no, you're good. Go for it. So yeah, just to respond to your first point, if you ever have questions, we are here. We obviously want your thoughts and your feedback and your ideas, right, in this group setting. But if you ever have questions or other thoughts and you're not sure where things might fit in, you're always welcome to reach out to our staff, to any member of our staff who you'd like. So we are open and ready for those conversations.
And just to add to that, Ludmilla, I really appreciate you bringing up the point that this is a Bagley-Keene committee, and so we have rules that we have to abide, that we want to be sensitive to. So as we want to really leverage everybody's knowledge and sharing information, we want to be sensitive to that. So I appreciate you bringing that. I think there is a section in the charter that speaks to the Bagley-Keene rules. Might be good to add to that something about communication channel of rather than what not to do, include how to engage and communicate information so it's clear for everyone. So very important point. And with regard to collaboration and kind of having those intervals, Ludmilla, around you talked about, and I think you broke up a little bit, but what I gather from that is the important to do some kind of a rethinking, at intervals throughout the process to kind of check with each other to make sure, are we still collaborating? Is this still done in a way that is effective and support what we have set up to do? So having some kind of opportunity to kind of check in with the work that we're doing, I think, is an important part of it. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant because you were cut up. Okay, all right, but that just triggered that thought for me. So thank you, really appreciate your thoughts there. If there's nobody else, I think I'm just gonna keep moving and to the next slide, which is about decision-making. And we've had the conversation with all of you around the need for decision, and maybe it's not so much decision making, but just making sure that we have some opportunities to identify areas of consensus but also identify and explore and learn from areas of disagreement. And so you will see in the charter, there's a suggested process that is meant to really think through when we have a topic that we're covering, how do we go through it where we all have opportunities to share information. So building on what we just heard about the importance of information sharing information, making sure that we don't just share how, what our answer is to something, what is our thinking around a question, but explain kind of the underlying consideration that inform our understanding on a particular topic. And with that, make sure that we jointly think through those underlying assumptions and understanding that it's important to disagree openly, to make sure that we all share our, it goes back to the principle of safe space, that we allow everyone to disagree openly because these are opportunity for learning. And to just highlight as participation is particularly important, that silence does not mean consent. So really encourage people to, especially if you disagree with something, to join the conversation and share that as a way for us to expand our learning. So with an open conversation like that, what we hope to do is identify those areas where we have general consensus and where there might be some divergent views, so we can have a more comprehensive reporting and guidance to the council in that way. And actually, before I go to this question below, I want to, on the next slide, to just share with everyone the gradient of agreements. Several of you suggested that we use such a tool, which is a different representation of those steps that I went through, but it's a way to kind of check in with everyone and see if someone provide a particular response, and do we really have a consensus, and check in with everyone. So those who are maybe the 1 to 3 do not support a particular perspective or need more information, have an opportunity to engage with the 4s and 5s who may have a stronger support and thinking around a particular topic. So again, it's just another way to really emphasize that areas of disagreement are generally places where we can all grow and learn together. And we don't want to shy away from that. We really want to encourage people to participate respectfully, but come fully into a conversation. So the question for you is one on the previous page. We can go back to that. Are those steps seems reasonable to you? Is there something else that you want to add to clarify how we go through that process of identifying what we all agree and support, and how do we support those who may have difference of opinion? And do we need a tool do you think it would be helpful to have a tool such as the gradient of agreement to kind of check the temperature in the room and encourage people to engage? And I'll pause and would love to get your thoughts on it. And I think just to add one more thing is generally we don't foresee voting by the committee, but if they are, I think in the charter it states that that would be based on majority. And we'd love to get your thoughts now. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. I would just say for the gradients of agreement, I've used that in a few different spaces, and I really like it as a tool. I think it's really helpful in sorting out, like, when do we disagree, but like I disagree, but like, let's keep moving forward, versus like, I disagree and I'm going to immediately resign from this council once we pass this because I'm so virulently against it. So I really like the use of that tool and support that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else has had experience with this kind of process, or have any questions about it that we should address, clarify? And maybe at a minimum, if this seems reasonable, it would be great, just a thumbs up on the gradient of agreement. Do you think that that's a good tool to use as needed? And I can't see everybody's windows, but maybe Giselle can, and you can let me know if there are a bunch of thumbs up there. Do we have thumbs up?
Yeah, we did get a few thumbs up.
Okay.
I can't see, I don't see that, where you can even react to that other than raising your hand.
Oh, okay, that's.
We
what that
can't
is.
actually do
we
the
don't-
thumbs up.
Yeah, there's no reactions.
All we can do is.
Oh,
raise
but
our
I can literally thumb up. Okay.
Oh, okay then. Like
Actually
the
do it.
good old days, just a thumbs up. All right. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to continue on. And the last, I think I have just a couple more slides, but this slide around time commitment and engagement on the committee. You know, we've had with all of you conversations around the membership, and I think across the board, everybody said, you know, this is our first year. That should not really count because we're just onboarding. We're kind of getting a sense of what this is all about. Though today we are starting to work, right? So what we landed on is to have a staggered 2-year membership. So we're thinking this will be a 2-year, and then some of you would be reappointed by the council co-chairs. Many of you expressed the importance of having this kind of staggered membership, so it doesn't always feel like you're starting from scratch, that there is an overlap. And so some of the current members will bring that kind of knowledge of the work that you're doing into new membership. So we're going to do that. We're going to have that kind of a staggered flow of membership. And in terms of participations, we're going to keep the quarterly 2-hour meeting as scheduled, and these are nice anchors to kind of check with everyone and either start a conversation or come back once a subgroup may have had a chance to kind of do a deeper dive into a topic and check back with the committee. And what we hope is that in between those meetings that are kind of the anchors of engagement, that you'll have opportunities to do those subcommittee groups on particular topics. You'll be asked today to join some, that there might be opportunity to share information and do some between meeting work to help move the conversation along, because we don't want to limit it to those quarterly meetings. We want to make sure that there is flow of engagement throughout the year. So that's our intent for working with you and supporting you. Want to just check and see if there's anything on the charter that you think is important, that is missing, that you think would be important to include, or if there's anything else besides what we shared with you and what I went over today that needs to be added. So Ludmila is asking if there is a process for stepping down, replacing oneself, or recommending a new member or organization. And I think the membership is under the purview of the council co-chairs. Cody, do you want to add anything or respond to this question?
Yes, definitely. So the Cal ICH council co-chairs do appoint all members of the committee. However, if there's a situation, you know, we obviously hope everyone stays with us for your full term on the committee. However, we know things come up in life. So if there's ever a situation in which that would be the case, just feel free to reach out to us. We can talk about sort of what the process might look like. I think it's probably on a case-by-case basis because all sort of appointments go through our co-chairs. But yeah, please feel free to reach out if there's ever a situation in which that comes up.
Go ahead, Sharon.
I guess I just have a question. Maybe it's for Cody and the other Cal ICH staff. Because there are only 4 meetings a year of the advisory committee, I'm just wondering, is 2 years enough for people to kind of get acclimated and be able to make a difference, you know, from all of your perspectives on what you'd like to see the advisory committee doing? So I guess I just was curious what your thoughts were about having the 2-year membership.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to hear from others on this as well. I think this came out of the conversations that we've been talking about. And I think to Arit's earlier point, and to I think the point you're making here, which is like the 4 meetings a year is not necessarily sufficient, right? I think to do all the work that folks here have accepted these appointments in order to do. And I think that there was consideration of like, do we have more meetings? Are they longer, et cetera? But I think the thought that ended up being most relevant that we put in the charter here was that like there will be, you know, 4 official meetings and then work expected in between for those who have the time and capacity to do so. And so I think 2 years does give us time with both of those, you know, work streams to get some things done that we would hope to get done, as we will talk about in a minute. But definitely open to other people's thoughts if they think that that is not sufficient, or we have like if we have like disagreement on that here.
And Cody, maybe I can just add to in terms of what we heard from you. There was a whole range, I should say, from people who thought just 1 year to 4 years, and that was based on people's workload, ability to commit to doing work, also recognizing that we want to have some turnover to ensure that we're continuing and getting diverse perspective into it. So there are several different kind of issues that went into the importance of staggering. Many of you shared, it is really important to have some continuity. And so for those who really feel that they want to stay engaged and continue and contribute, there is that possibility to be reappointed for a second term. But also wanting to be respectful of those who can really only commit the 2 years, and they want to be able to be successful in supporting the council and doing this work and then move on to something else, recognizing that many of you are participating in a variety of leadership roles and opportunity to advance this work. So it was a balance of several different topics. So would love to hear from others on this, but just so you understand where, how we landed on it in terms of what we heard.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Reba.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. You know, so while I appreciate staggered membership, I am really concerned, greatly concerned about 2 years at 8 meetings or 8 committees. And I understand that, you know, there could be or will be subcommittees. However, I think that it's really important for this particular body to be able to form or build a foundation that so that those who come behind us, and I can't see that happening in a 2-year period. I do believe also that it was stated that in the charter, if ever you needed to leave or you couldn't remain or something was going on, you know, that you bring that to the but I believe that in order for us to be in this creation, that it would need to be more than 2 years. And I believe that I was one of those who talked about the 4-year, not that it had to be ongoing, but just to establish who we are and that foundation for others to build.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Reba. So just when we're tracking it for staff, a couple of things. The idea that this body, because it's just forming, should have a particularly larger term, because it takes time to create that foundation. And I remember you talked about a 4-year, even if later on it becomes a shorter term, that this first cohort needs more time to form and begin the work. And then that those who may not be able to stay on for the whole time, rather than adding people, that people can drop off and be replaced if they cannot stay on the committee. I think these were the two things that you were bringing up. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else wants to weigh in on this topic? This was I think this was a hard topic for all of us, as there were so many different opinions and considerations. Go ahead, Jennifer.
The only other thing I was thinking of is if you wanted to give an opportunity for new voices. I do agree with what everyone said. It's hard to gel kind of as an advisory group when you don't meet very often, but you could also do a percentage, right? That you'd want maybe, I don't know, 25% for new opportunities or new voices within the advisory board. So it's just another thing that came to mind as you were talking.
So Jennifer, just so I'm clear, set it for a longer term, but within that longer term, have a certain percentage that have a turnover.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else wants to weigh in on this particular topic, since it affects the whole committee in an important way? All right. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll go back and review all of our notes and take the input that you just provided and finalize this particular topic for the charter. The other thing we talked about was adding in terms of the purpose, the importance of supporting state departments and agency collaboration, clarifying the communication and information sharing within the Badley-Keene Act, having intermittent check-in to make sure that the committee feels it's doing what its intended purpose is, and following up on the terms based on the input provided. And so I think in the next slide, it's just a reminder that staff will finalize the charter based on the input that you just provided, and share it with you to just confirm your agreement to abide by the charter. And I think that's all I have for the charter, Cody. And thanks everyone again. It was really, I have to say, inspiring to have those conversations with you and learn from you. And I'm just really grateful for the fact that you all gave us your time to share your thoughts, and looking forward to the charter really being an anchor for the work that you're doing moving forward.
Great, thank you, Ori. And yeah, thank you all for your comments and your feedback throughout this process. So there's no requirement for the charter to be formally voted upon, but as Ori mentioned, our goal is to create a charter that everyone feels comfortable agreeing to, right? So we will happily take all of your input and bring it back and figure out what makes sense to make sure that everyone's sort of input gets taken into consideration here. And we'll send it out for you all to sign and sort of return back to us once we get there. So, and just again to say, like, we appreciate your participation on this committee and look forward to having our guiding principles that we just talked about, right? Like using those to root these conversations and develop guidance as we move forward. So I'm gonna move us on to our next item here, which you can see up on the screen. So our agenda item 5 centers around providing you an update about our action plan update process and starting a discussion about how the committee can help provide specific guidance in this process. And as you know, I think I've mentioned before, Cal ICH is in the process of updating our state action plan for preventing and ending homelessness, which has included conducting input sessions from our council, departments and agencies, the public and other partners. So I'm going to start us off just quickly by summarizing a bit about this process, and then we'll turn it over to Matthew Doherty, who's going to help the committee hone in on sort of one of the ways we're really hoping that you all will contribute to this process. And as a reminder, the goal of this update process is to add additional activities to the existing plan to cover the work being done by council member departments and agencies in fiscal year 23-24. Any more structural changes will be considered in a future iteration of the action plan. And so we will, but we'll take all of your feedback here. So great. On the next slide, I will go through where we are in our process and our timeline. Great. So as you can see here, we're currently in the process of holding input discussions with all of our council member departments and agencies, members of the public, external stakeholders, people with lived experience of homelessness, as well as our tribal nations and organizations. At the end of this month, we will facilitate a discussion about the action plan update at our council meeting on May 31st. And then this summer, we'll have our final discussions with departments and stakeholders and confirm all of the revised activities for fiscal year 23-24. And then the ultimate goal is to present the updated action plan for discussion and adoption at our council meeting in September. So as we've gone through a lot of our public input sessions and sessions with external stakeholders, we've pulled a few key themes that we just wanted to share with you all. So on this slide, you can see a lot of these are answers to the prompt about sort of what additional activities members of the public feel the state should be prioritizing in our work to prevent and end homelessness. And as you can see, some of the input, just to quickly summarize, right, covers coordination and performance measurement across all levels of government, institutional commitment through ongoing and flexible funding, tailored services for specific populations such as youth, survivors of domestic violence, people with mental and behavioral health needs, and undocumented individuals, education around harm reduction and housing first principles, encouraging and providing technical assistance to help providers conduct interdisciplinary outreach, a commitment to broader frameworks such as housing as a human right or Tenants' Bill of Rights, and looking into utilizing public land or vacant space for housing. So we're going to provide sort of a deeper summary of the input that we've received from these sessions to the council on May 31st, but just wanted to give you all a sense of sort of what we're hearing in those sessions as well, especially because some of these are very closely tied to the prompts that we have for you all to provide us feedback on the next slide. So before I kick it to Matthew to start this discussion, I just want to start by saying that, as Arit mentioned in our conversations with you all about your goals for the action plan, we heard clearly that you all wanted to work and talk about something specific and have some specific guidelines and topics, as well as the opportunity to do work outside of these full group meetings. And so for that reason, we have chosen sort of 2 specific prompts to get your input on that are really going to help us during this process and sort of future action plan related work that we have going on. And I'll just say also that this conversation we have now is just going to be the beginning of the work happening here. And we will be asking you to sort of express interest in working to develop more formalized guidance to provide to the council in September on these topics. So as we go through these conversations, just please think about which prompt you'd be interested in delving into further with other members of the committee between, now and your next meeting in August. So we'll obviously give you more details about these 2 high level prompts that we have up here, but to do that, I will pass it to Matthew.
Great, thanks, Cody. Excuse me, and I'm Matthew Dart. I'm an independent consultant who's been working with the state and Cal ICH specifically for the last few years, including on the development of the action plan and the update. I'm excited to be here with you all today to have this conversation, and thank you all for being parts of this really important advisory committee. So we do want to dive into 2 topics that build off of earlier discussions, the feedback from the council, other input we're receiving, priorities that you have identified. And so we want to start diving into those today, and they interrelate, but we sort of divvy them up to implementation of funding and programs and some specific ideas you have on how the state could strengthen the impact of its funding and its programs. And then also, how can the state and the council be thinking about measuring that impact, tracking progress, refining strategies based upon performance measures. I just explicitly want to say that we know we're starting the discussions with you today. And as Cody indicated, we really want to identify folks who want to work together offline to further formalize the guidance, to think through in more detail. But we're hoping that as a full group, you can kind of get the ball rolling today, and then others might be able to dive in more deeply as a smaller group and flesh out some of the specific ideas and recommendations. Next slide, please. We're having this conversation in the context of the action plan, but just want to be clear that the action plan is not the only vehicle through which your ideas, your guidance, your recommendations can have impact. There's lots of pathways that your ideas, your guidance could impact state activities. So sometimes they might be brought directly to the council for discussion and potential action. Other times they might be brought to future advisory committee meetings or a small group to further refine. In the future, there'll be a lived experience advisory board. So at times your thinking might be brought to that group to further refine, think through, and solidify guidance and ideas. Sometimes the recommendations might go to one of the interagency working groups that Cal ICH helps lead for discussion of potential action. So things that don't necessarily rise to the council level of discussion, but might be more appropriate for a working group to tackle and decide if and how they could operationalize. Sometimes there might be special conversations that get brought together across agencies and departments to delve into what we're hearing from the advisory committee, or sometimes it might go directly to one specific department or to Cal ICH explicitly to dive into and to think about whether there's actions to be taken in response to the guidance. And the little two-way arrows on the left side of this graphic are supposed to indicate that there'll also be a feedback loop where the staff are committed to bringing back to you an understanding of what pathway did the information or ideas go on and what's the outcome of that pathway, so that you're hearing back whether your ideas are moving forward and how and through what vehicles. Next slide, please. So we do want to dive more deeply into some of the specific ideas around funding and programs and how the state could have even greater impact with those programs. Could think about whether there's guidance or messaging that the state could do that would strengthen impact, or other ways the state could streamline or improve access to funding, or just kind of an open-ended other ideas that you have. They are very open-ended questions, but we especially want you to focus on thinking about what could help achieve better alignment across state programs so that programs are working together better and having a greater impact locally, or what kind of coordination do you think the state needs to strengthen across departments in order for programs to have their greatest impact? And that could be coordinated guidance, but it could also be other ways of coordinating and collaborating. And of those things, what do you think are most important, should be prioritized? We're going to take feedback through a mix of mechanisms here. We're going to use a Jamboard in just a minute, and then we're also going to have some dialogue and discussion with you all. Again, knowing that we won't be able to explore every idea you might have deeply. So then we're going to also ask you to identify if this is a topic area in which you want to dive in further outside of this meeting, and we'll ask you to identify yourself in the chat box so we know who to follow up with and to try to figure out how the conversations can move forward. So we're going to bring up the Jamboard in just a moment. I think many of you have had experience with the Jamboard at prior meetings. Staff and it got very positive feedback about it, so we thought we'd try to use it today, but we don't want the Jamboard to be the only way that you get to communicate with us. So we're going to open it up. Use that as a way to guide the conversation. Spend a few minutes of just you all putting ideas on the Jamboard, but then we'll have time when you can be doing that, or you could also be weighing in verbally and offering up ideas that don't usually get translated or reflecting on what you're seeing. So we're going to share a link momentarily. Probably now is a good time to share the link. You'll click on it, it'll take you to the website, and then we're going to share that screen. So that's what you're seeing on the screen. There are going to be two boards for you to look at. We're going to be on the first board first. That's probably pretty obvious, but we're going to focus first on the funding and programs questions. And then we'll go to the second conversation focused on measures. So I'm going to let staff bring up or share the link and bring up the Jamboard. Okay, so these are kind of the same questions we had on the slide deck. So we're just going to keep this up and not go back to the PowerPoint for a while. So here, just again, would love to just spend a couple of minutes, give you all a chance to just focus on the Jamboard, put anything up that you want there. And then I'll come back in just maybe 2 or 3 minutes and also ask if folks have comments, suggestions that you want to offer verbally. So for now, we'll just Jamboard.
And if anyone has any issues using the Jamboard, feel free to put your comment in the chat and I can just throw it on the Jamboard for you.
Quick question, is there anything we should do? Like, let's say we want to like amplify something that someone else has put on the Jamboard, like put a little check next to it or something like that.
That's a perfect idea. Yeah, why don't you put a check, or you can put another sticky note next to it that says I agree or something like that. But yeah, that's a good idea.
But there's also a question in the chat. Do you want people to put their names or initials next to their comments?
Not necessarily. If you want to follow up or you want us to follow up with you, we definitely can. But I think, or if you have like more thoughts that you would like to elaborate afterward, that's great, but no need to necessarily do that.
Great. Lots of very specific ideas, as well as some overarching intentions and expectations, and ways to streamline both on the application, but also on the reporting side. Okay, I don't want to distract people from continuing to do this, but I also know for some folks, this might not be the easiest way to weigh in and give your feedback. So I'm going to open it up if there's folks who want to also offer any verbal comments, suggestions, especially around ways that funding needs to be better aligned, access needs to be streamlined, departments need to coordinate more to maximize the impact of their different funding streams. So if there's folks who want to weigh in with your voice rather than your Post-it notes, feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to keep up and call on you. And those all disappear because we went to the, it got full and you went to another page. Oh, they're back. Okay. Anybody who wants to jump in and offer any comments with your mic. You know, must enjoy Jamboarding more than maybe we anticipated, because I'm not seeing any hands come up yet. It's just any, you can also just, if you want to verbally reinforce any of the stuff you're seeing on the screen or add a little more detail to a comment that you put up, any kind of comments are welcome. Elisa, I see your hand up.
Hi, Matthew. What comes up to me and just hearing from different communities, you did a really great job, was it a year or two ago, around like, how do you grade funding with all the different sources? And it feels like we need to do an update now that is both more funding is coming online, the different state departments that are offering the funding and newer communities that are participating with the state for the first time. So some kind of level of saying, what are the uses of funds? What do the different departments typically, the kind of funding that departments typically fund, like is it capital operating services, and how do you best grade those if it's possible?
Great, it's great, very appreciate the feedback. And I think you might be referring to the putting the funding pieces together guide, and we actually are working on an update to that. And that might also be something that folks could weigh in offline of like, how could we, maybe not for this edition, but for the next edition, how could we strengthen that guidance and make it easier for folks to follow recommendations? That's great, thank you. Anyone else who wants to jump in and offer up a thought or idea or suggestion? Yep.
I think one of the things that I'm struck by is it was interesting for me to see that I wasn't the only one who felt like we have to manage a lot of different funding sources that all have different reporting requirements and all actually have different ways of looking at that data, different categories. It's really inefficient when you're on the ground involved with all of these different programs. And I kind of was thinking that I was trying to put my head in the space of the state, and the state, I would assume, wants to know whether they're really focused on the outcomes, and they've carved everything up into both the funding source, the target population it's supposed to serve, and then the activity within that target population. So what it means practically for us on the ground is we end up carving out our programs into very little small pieces, specific contractors for specific activities for a specific funding source. And you really lose the bigger picture, and you almost lose the flexibility that the state wanted to give these communities, because we have to be so specific in order to report back to the state in the way the state wants this data. So in a way, I feel like this question is a little bit linked to the performance measures, because I get it. The state's like, is our money doing anything of value? And how can we amplify the funding sources that are most effective in what ways? But in doing that, you're kind of, it's kind of counterproductive to what I think the state is actually trying to achieve, which is give communities flexibility and funding to solve these problems in the ways that make sense for their communities.
Great. Okay, it's really helpful. I think I heard both kind of alignment and consistency of measures across programs, but also maybe raising it up a bit of a level. So it's more about, it's not necessarily about what impact did this dollar have, but what impact are you achieving through a range of programs and efforts. Great. Other folks who want to weigh in on this topic? Reba, I see your hand.
Yes, I think for me, it's more about understanding from the provider's perspectives, because I think about what I'm hearing too often around there not being enough funding to pay for staff, and then how staff sort of, moves from one agency or organization to another because they're paying $2 or $3 more. And, so when I think about funding and programs, I think it's really important that, even if I'm going in the wrong direction in this conversation right in this moment, it is truly something that I think has to be examined for what many agencies or organizations call capacity. So I'd be curious to hear if anyone would speak to the funding to retain staff. Is that an issue? And then also around the flexibility of funding. So in other words, don't make me buy a whole box of oranges when I really need more apples, and then forcing me to use the oranges when folks that we're serving need apples. I hope that makes sense.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you very much for those comments, and especially the funding for capacity, or sometimes funders underfunding organizations to such a degree that they can't retain staff or recruit and retain staff. Doug, I see your hand.
Sorry, I'm at a train terminal, so it's rather loud. I apologize. I'll echo that comment about sustainability around the staff. And I guess I would really love to see some thought given to complexity, the degree of complexity that is resulting from all these different agencies working ostensibly together, but like some effort on the sort of like post-occupancy side for the state agencies who are involved to really understand what it's like to administer all of these different resources, and to think about what that means for future funding.
Great. I think, there's a little bit of background, Doug, but I think we got your main point, especially around capacity challenges created by the complexity of the funding and administering the funding, and the state needs to better understand the complexity and the capacity demands being created through the way programs are being administered. Okay, other folks who want to weigh in verbally on this issue area? Reba, did your hand go back up?
Oh, I put my hand back up.
Okay.
So I just really zoomed in on collective and what that actually looks like in the community, the importance of working together. And the reason is, and I don't know how, and I think it was Dr. Dunya who talked about braiding dollars, but I'm oftentimes really concerned about how dollars could be, or funding could come down that would really allow people not to be afraid of, who's going to pay for whatever. And whether that are there barriers, what are those barriers that are in play that prevent folks from actually creating a collective impact? Because as a person with lived experience, I'll be very honest with you, that it really does take a collective, and it's very challenging and difficult to have to jump from one place to another when folks could be partnering and creating partnership and relationship to really improve the quality of my life, versus me having to go here, there, and everywhere. And so I don't know what that looks like, but when we use language like collective impact, that makes me feel very warm and fuzzy inside, because I believe that is a solution to ending homelessness. But at the same time, the question for me is, can it be done? And again, I'll go right back again to what are the barriers, what are the challenges that are in play for organizations and agencies to not, actually pull that off. So.
Okay. That's great. Very helpful. Thank you. Okay, it looks like the Jamboard has slowed down as well here. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, when we move to the next discussion, if people have an idea they want to put back on this page, they can navigate themselves there and continue to add. So you don't have to stop adding comments on that one. But we're going to dive into the next discussion area. And they're all very interrelated, and it's something about this conversation. If you think about something you wished you'd offered up for the previous conversation, feel free to do that. But we do want to dive into the issue of performance measurement and how can the state best assess its progress on the commitments it's made in the action plan. We're just going to preview the questions and we'll come back to these, but we're specifically looking for other ideas for measures for how the state could assess progress across the action areas, how could assess overall progress. Several of you have spoken to the need for kind of collective community level impact, other ways that state should be trying to measure for that, or any other ideas that you have. So actually, I'm going to pause. Cody, should I have asked people to volunteer for the smaller group discussions for the first topic before we move on to this, or are we going to do both of those at the end and have people sort of identify which topic they might want to spend more time on?
Sure. Why don't we do that now, just since we had the conversation? And then at the end, people can always message again afterward too.
Okay, so before we dive into this question, I apologize for the confusion. We just want to pause. If there are people on the committee who want to spend more time working together outside of these meetings, really think through some specific ideas, recommendations, guidance of how the state could strengthen the impact of funding and programs, build off of things that were suggested, and just identify yourself in the chat box. Just put your name in there and your interest. I think people are going to have to pick maybe a little bit because we can't have everybody sign up for both groups. So just think about the conversations you're most interested in engaging in further. I'm going to give folks a minute to do that.
If we could just go back one slide so people remember which question, what even the question was. Oh, 2 slides, thank you.
Great to see people volunteering. That's great. Okay, I think people know what they're volunteering for. You keep thinking about it, and then we're gonna move into the next discussion. You can keep putting it in the chat box, and I'll just frame up the next discussion at the same time. So if we can go back forward 2 more slides. So similar, we're going to do a mix of Jamboarding and discussion on these topics. But we want to give you a little bit of more background information so you kind of know the context in which you're currently weighing in. So next slide, please. Ultimately, I think the BCSH and Cal ICH team are interested in thinking about measures that would align and help understand and assess progress across each of the 5 action areas in the plan, which I think you've heard several times in past meetings, but action area 1 is around strengthening systems. Action area 2 is about addressing the needs of people while they are unsheltered. Action area 3 focuses on providing strong and effective sheltering and interim housing opportunities. Action area 4 is focused on permanent housing, and action area 5 is around prevention, both upstream prevention as people are engaged with other systems, but also targeted strategies to prevent crises from resulting in homelessness. The action plan itself and the progress report that I think you've seen before as well. Next slide, please. Does include measures already that the council has committed to focusing on, to reporting outcomes on, which weren't directly aligned and organized by the action areas, but tend to cut across 1 or more of the action areas within the plan. So right now, the high-level measures that the council commits to focusing on through the action plan are the number of Californians experiencing sheltered and unsheltered homelessness at a point in time, including various subpopulations. That's probably most associated with action areas 3 and 4. I'm also looking at the numbers of continuums of care in California that report increases versus decreases in those sheltered and unsheltered counts. That's probably also most aligned with action areas 3 and 4. I'm looking also at the number of people spending time in emergency shelter and transitional housing programs in California, including the different subpopulations. That's probably most associated with action area 3. Next slide, please. The measures also look at the number of Californians who experience homelessness for the first time each year. So that's probably most associated with action area 5, focusing on prevention. Focus on the number of Californians successfully exiting homelessness each year. That's especially connected to the permanent housing focused action area number 4. The number of Californians who return to homelessness each year, probably most associated with action area 5. So for none of these is it a perfect 1-for-1 relationship, and they were identified to try to measure across the full range of the impacts across all of the action areas. Then we also look at the number of children and youth experiencing homelessness at some point during the school year, looking at Department of Education data, including both students and families and unaccompanied students. And that probably cuts across many, but it might be most associated with action area 4. And then looking at how California's performance across these measures compares to national and regional trends. And maybe that's most connected to how strong their systems are in action area 1. So again, you don't need to know for sure whether it's an idea that you might suggest, whether it's already being measured or not, but we just want to give you a little bit of sense of some of the things that already are being measured and reported. And then within the reporting, the state is also committed to doing equity analyses and looking for disparities and inequities in how within this data and how the outcomes and experiences vary by folks in different racial groups, other subpopulations. So there is an equity lens applied across all of these measures as well. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go back to the Jamboard approach in just a minute. So I think you'll be able to go to page 2 within your own. And we want to look at what other measures do you think we should be looking at to assess progress. Could be overarching. You might have ideas for specific action areas. Anything about overall progress or other kinds of measurements, ways that we can measure the collective impact that folks have talked about. And then just again, open-ended other ideas that you have around strengthening state level performance measurement activities. So I think people use the same link if they don't still have it on their screen to get to the Jamboard, and you're going to want to advance yourself to page 2, and we're going to bring it up on the screen. And I will just note that, like, if the questions we're asking you on this topic aren't the questions you want to answer, just answer the question you wish I was asking you instead. That has to do with performance measurement. I see lots of folks have already been putting ideas here. So we're going to take a couple minutes of just giving you time to put comments here on sticky notes. And then I'll open it up if there's folks who want to weigh in verbally and offer other thoughts or react to what you're seeing. But we'll spend 2 or 3 minutes just on the Jamboard. See ideas related to make sure we're assessing client experience and input cost issues that might vary from place to place. Maybe some measures like first-time homelessness, whose measurement needs to be refined. Focus on accountability around racial equity outcomes. Returns to homelessness after people exit the housing. Okay. Okay. See some comments around diving in, working with communities of color to better understand appropriate data collection methods. See other systemic measures that must be focused on, not just reductions in unsheltered homelessness. Great. Okay, so people can keep putting comments up there, but also a chance now if folks want to weigh in verbally with ideas that you either want to reinforce what you're seeing, things that aren't easily captured on a comment note, other ideas that folks want to weigh in on. Don't see an avalanche of raised hands, so if you're holding back, not wanting, I'm sure you should jump in now, feel free to jump in now. I'm gonna offer a slightly different prompt here. See, lots of great ideas here, lots of which are focused on kind of how do we measure the impact of programs, or look at local data, maybe roll it up to see what's happening statewide. But would love also if you have thoughts about how does the state measure its own activities itself, not just what's happening in the data locally, but are other ways that you think the state could be thinking about measuring how it's impacting, implementing its programs, the kind of impact it's having, equity areas that aren't necessarily just grounded in local data. Are there other kinds of performance measures you think the state should be focusing on for its own work? And again, you can either weigh in with thoughts on that on the Jamboard, or if anyone wants to jump in, use your microphone, you're welcome to do that as well.
Elisa, I see your hand up. So
Oh,
you feel free to jump in. I know I've been staring at the Jamboard too, so it's
I
hard,
know,
easy
I
to get
wasn't sure.
distracted.
I'm too much trained in the school, like raise your hand. No, just I think part of what's missing for me is understanding current conversations around kind of maybe minimum data expectations among the different funding programs. And I go back to the rejection of the HAP applications and saying that, oh, that wasn't enough. And so wondering like if since then, or maybe like to participate in a subgroup, this would be kept up, but like current conversations, like are there some kind of minimum performance standards that are being proposed or that people have talked about as a range? I think that would be helpful because it's hard for me to grasp, especially at the state level, without that.
Okay, that's helpful.
You know, I can't, I didn't put anything on the Jamboard because I think this is really hard and I'm like fresh out of ideas on performance measurement around this topic. I think we all kind of, I shouldn't speak for, I'm not gonna speak for anyone. I personally think the PIT is an extremely flawed tool and I just hate that we continue to like rely on it because it feels so flawed to me. And I also think that the whole concept of keeping track the way we're supposed to so intentionally around HMIS with a population that is by nature extremely transient is just kind of like an exercise in futility as well. And I wonder around the performance measurement, the creation of housing in California, which California is trying very hard to do, is so directly linked to this topic. So like really, in some ways, our success in addressing homelessness is deeply linked to the state's success in building housing. And those performance measurements should be linked, because we know that is probably the single biggest driver of homelessness in California is availability of housing. So to me, they feel like there needs to be a closer connection between those two things, rather than trying to count homeless people, which is just really, it's also undignified in some ways. Like there's something really problematic about that approach of driving around trying to count people and thinking that that's somehow going to be helpful. So
Great, very helpful, thank you.
I just wanted to offer a +1 to Megan.
Great.
Like, how do we connect the community's achievements when it comes to RHNA to homelessness?
Great, thank you for that. Okay, so I think similarly, we want to know who might want to dive into these kinds of topics and issues that are specifically around measurement, outside the meeting, smaller group discussion, bring things back to the fuller group. So if you can also start to identify yourself in the chat box as being interested in group 2. If now that you've heard both discussions, you've chosen which one you want to focus in, just you can refer to group 1 as the funding programs impact group, group 2 as the performance measurement, and just indicate in the chat box which group you might be interested in. I don't think everybody's required to pick one, but you have the opportunity to pick one or the other, or even both if you wish. Jamboard is still quite active, so it's great.
I was going to say, lucky for everyone on this call, you are not starting from scratch, because you have all of these thoughts and ideas and questions to work off of.
Okay, I see folks volunteering in the chat box. That's great. And keep doing that if you wish. I'm gonna wrap this discussion up again. We know we're just starting these conversations, which is why the smaller group conversations might be really critical for really fleshing out some very specific ideas and what you would prioritize the state try to do at least first that would have the most impact. And appreciate folks using the Jamboard so thoroughly. I have to say I'm a little surprised that the Jamboard was so successful that folks didn't even feel the need to weigh in verbally. So I'm just impressed with how folks have used that technology. And I'm going to turn it back to Cody, I think, who's going to talk quickly about some next steps.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate your use of the Jamboard. Matthew and I had a bet earlier as to see which method would be more popular, and so I'm just kidding. But yeah, I really appreciate that you all participated in both capacities. And so I just want to give you a sense of sort of the next steps, right? What's coming up after this meeting based on the discussion that we just had, and what we're going to do with your all's feedback. So at the May 31st council meeting, Cal ICH staff will update council members on sort of these questions that we just posed to you all today, and our plan for creating more formal guidance around those with you all. And then after this meeting today, we're going to follow up with committee members who expressed interest in the chat, as you've been doing, in working on these specific prompts outside of the meeting, and we'll sort of help initiate that work. And make sure that it's brought back right to this group once progress has been made. So at our next advisory committee meeting in August, we'll come together to sort of discuss the work that's been done between meetings by these groups, with the goal of presenting some more formalized guidance to the council at their September meeting, if possible. If we need more time for any reason, that's also okay, but just setting that as sort of the initial goal. So just want to pause here and see if there are any questions about that before we move on. I want to make sure it's clear how your all's the feedback and ideas are getting moved forward. Great. All right. Well, thank you all. Really appreciate the really substantive discussion. And I'm excited. I was trying to read on the screen all of the comments, but I am excited to get to sit with them a little bit more and see what everyone was talking about. So with that, we've come to the end of this agenda item. Thank you all again. And we will move on to our next agenda item.
All right, we're on agenda item 6. We will now accept public comments. We welcome all comments and feedback. I would like to remind everyone that we are unable to discuss items that are not on the agenda for today's meeting. Additionally, due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions. If you have any questions for Cal ICH or the committee, the best way for you to get a response is to email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. Everybody will get 2 minutes for their comment. A Cal ICH staff member will soon share their screen with the 2-minute timer countdown, and then we'll warn you when your time is about to expire. If you're connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and we will allow you to unmute yourself. For those joining us by phone, you may press *9 to indicate that you'd like to comment. All right, I do see one hand raised currently. Claire, would you please switch over to a timer? All right, we have a comment from Davis Bernstein. All right, Davis, you should be able to unmute yourself and voice your comment.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I would just like to suggest that if, in case I missed it, that just counting the numbers of homeless, I think, is problematic, especially in terms of prevention. I think the reasons, if you had a list of reasons that you could check off, because the different reasons have a different approach to prevention. I personally am interested in the side of mediation and keeping people housed at home. And I think that's a very important one. And also with landlord-tenant issues. And the other thought I have is affordability. It's not just supply of housing. I mean, maybe it goes without saying affordability, but if you're just thinking about building more and more housing, my personal opinion is that it'll never end because there'll always be people who are homeless. So if that's what functional homelessness means, I suppose that you'll get to some level. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the meeting.
Thank you for your comment. All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds to see if anybody else raises their hand. Okay, I'm seeing no more comments. As always, if you have any other feedback for us, please email us. And I will pass it back to Cody for some final remarks.
Great, thanks, Giselle. And thank you again to all of our committee members for your insights and your comments during the meeting today. As you can see, we are working hard to move this committee towards actionable work and are only able to do so because of your thoughtful input and attention here. So our next committee meeting will be on August 14th at 1 p.m. It should be in your calendars. If it's not, please email us and let us know. I also just want to thank the members of the public who have attended this meeting. We really appreciate your interest in our work around homelessness. And I know many of you who attend our meetings are working to address homelessness either in the state or in your local communities. So we appreciate all of your efforts. And we hope you all will listen into our next council meeting, which is coming up on May 31st at 1 p.m. So with that, this meeting is adjourned at 2:49. We'll give everyone some time back. And to receive up-to-date information on the council's activities, as always, please sign up on our email list, which you can see on the screen here. There's a sign up on the website. We also encourage you to follow us on social media. So thank you all again for your time. Good to see everyone, and thanks for the great conversation.
Thank you.